Hi, this is Jeff Walton with the Institute on Religion and Democracy in Washington, D.C. I'm joined today by Bishop Ryan Reed of the Diocese of Fort Worth. Bishop Reed was elected as Bishop Coadjutor for the diocese back in, consecrated back in September, and became the diocesan bishop upon Jack Eicher's retirement at the end of 2019. Thanks so much for joining us, Bishop Reed.
You're welcome, Jeff. It's good to be here.
Your diocese has been in the news in the last week. The Diocese of Fort Worth was one of the dioceses of the Episcopal Church, along with about 4 other formerly Episcopal Church dioceses. It sought to disassociate itself in the 2000s. And upon departing the denomination in 2008, the diocese was sued by the Episcopal Church, and that produced litigation that was ongoing for nearly 11 years. Last week, the Supreme Court of Texas released a unanimous decision in which it was determined that the Diocese of Fort Worth was the legitimate entity that controlled the corporation that basically stewards all of the parish properties and ministry assets. This has been a pretty big decision, and thanks so much, Bishop Reed, for being willing to share with viewers about it. Can you kind of explain how did this originally come about? You were the Dean of St. Vincent's Cathedral at the time, I believe, and this has been something that has been a pretty consistent part of the life of the diocese all the way through that time period.
Yeah, I was called to be Dean of St. Vincent's Cathedral in June of 2002. I was also a delegate to General Convention, and so in August of 2003, Gene Robinson was elected Bishop of New Hampshire, and that then began really a spiral of kind of disconnecting the diocese from General Convention. We did ask for alternative Episcopal oversight from the Archbishop of Canterbury. That, of course, never went anywhere. In 2006, when the Episcopal Church affiliated with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and then elected Catherine Shorey as the presiding bishop, I think the handwriting was on the wall. The diocese could no longer, I think, be loyal to both the gospel and also to the Episcopal Church. And so 2007, a canon came across that would disaffiliate us entirely from the General Convention of the Episcopal Church. And I believe it was about 82% voted in favor, both among the clergy and the laity. So at that point, we realized we were moving in the direction of separating. And of course, there were 4 other dioceses that were in the same process. We came up with a canon locally in the diocese to allow parishes who wanted to remain loyal to General Convention of the Episcopal Church to do so and stay in with their property and remain part of the Episcopal Church. We partnered with the Diocese of Dallas to kind of give them Episcopal coverage, and the presiding bishop blew all of that up. Several of our parishes back then did follow the process through, and we awarded them their property, and they remain with the Episcopal Church today. A handful refused to do that because the presiding bishop needed someone locally who could file suit against us in an attempt to take all of our property. So that began, the whole legal proceedings. I think it was January of 2009 when the lawsuit was filed. So it's been 11 years and a few months to get to this, what is ultimately a final ruling. The local loyal Episcopalians who filed suit can appeal back to the Texas Supreme Court for a rehearing, but it was unanimous, and it's the second time the Supreme Court has ruled essentially in our favor. This time was complete and unambiguous in terms of the ruling, a rejection of hierarchical principles of the Episcopal Church and going with neutral principles of the law in terms of property disputes, a complete rejection of the Dennis canon, And so the likelihood that there'll be a rehearing is next to zero. And then they do have the option of appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court. Because this is a state property law issue, and because they did use the 1979 Supreme Court ruling about church property disputes and state law, I don't think the Supreme Court of the U.S. is going to even take a second to look at this. So once that's all complete, the mandate from the Supreme Court of Texas will then go back to the district judge for it to be executed, and at that point we'll know, where we go from there. One of the things throughout all of this, and interestingly enough, the first question out of one of the justices of the Texas Supreme Court had to do with 1 Corinthians, and if Christians go before a secular court, St. Paul's point is they've already lost, and I think one of the things that we've learned is the spiritual handicap or weight that comes upon you, even when you're defending yourself in a lawsuit. And so this Sunday on Pentecost, I'm calling the entire diocese to a day of penance, of repentance, and we're all going to collectively pray the litany of penitence together and repent of any way in which this lawsuit has kept us from being faithful to the gospel, any way that it may have hardened our hearts towards those who differ with us or those who wanted to hurt us. And to be honest with you, that's what this has really been about. One of the rectors of the TEC loyal group here has just been awful in terms of his words and actions and the way he treated Bishop Eicher, the things that he said to us in the early days of trying to negotiate a settlement. And so it's very easy to hold a grudge or seek vengeance or even celebrate at their loss. And I don't want us to have any kind of spirit of triumphalism. I want us to be focused on the gospel. So this Sunday is a day of penance and a day of rededication. So on Pentecost, we're all going to reaffirm our baptismal vows and return to 100% focus on sharing the gospel and the transforming love of Jesus, because that's what's important. All of this property and these funds and the buildings, those are all just tools to help us, share the good news of Jesus Christ. And we could do with or without them, and to be honest with you, but if we're not doing that, then those things don't matter at all.
Mm-hmm. Since this process began, the Diocese of Fort Worth became one of the founding jurisdictions of the Anglican Church in North America, of which it's now the second largest diocese by membership. And you're also one of the leading Anglo-Catholic voices within the ACNA. What would you want people who are outside of the North American context to understand about the reality of the lawsuits that have occurred? Because as you've noted, the final word hasn't yet been said in Fort Worth. And additionally, the Diocese of South Carolina is still amidst litigation. So this isn't a completely done process yet, even though it started so long ago. What would someone who is in another part of the Global Anglican Communion need to know about the situation?
Well, I mean, I've heard different stories about how this is sold by the Episcopal Church in other provinces. I mean, the fact is it's all retribution for not getting on board with the agenda of the Episcopal Church, which is oftentimes, I think, contrary to the gospel. And it's interesting. I mean, in Illinois, Quincy, they've had some victories from the ACNA side. South Carolina obviously is up in the air. Pittsburgh had entered into all of this with, I think, a little bit of a handcuff in terms of agreements they made before leaving TEC and hoping to form the ACNA. But in San Joaquin, a perfect example of how this is simply about retribution. They talk about, protecting the heritage of the Episcopal Church and the mission of the Episcopal Church. Well, they won a number of properties in the Diocese of San Joaquin, and those are now sitting empty. There is no gospel ministry taking place there. The grass is 3 feet high. I mean, nobody's maintaining the facilities. They don't have the funds to keep them up. And it was all about punishing the people of the Diocese of San Joaquin for not being on board with where General Convention was going. I know that they filed something like 70 or 80 lawsuits across the country, 5 of which involved dioceses. There was never a faithful attempt on the side of the Episcopal Church to really negotiate any of this. It was always going to be kind of a burn down the house approach. And in fact, I think their goal here was to try to outspend us, and outlast us. And we've been very blessed on that side of things that we could continue functioning in terms of the life of the diocese and defending ourselves at the same time. But it is, as I said earlier, going back to that 1 Corinthians principle, it really is a spiritual handicap. We've had churches that are part of this property dispute, that have deferred maintenance, have deferred projects in terms of expansion and things like that, because people didn't want to give if they weren't sure their gift was going to go to gospel ministry. And I'm proud our diocese was a founding member of the ACNA. You may not know, part of the process in all of this is when we separated after the second vote in 2008 at our convention, we entered under the spiritual authority of the province of the Southern Cone. And then in 2009 in June, in fact, at St. Vincent's Cathedral, the ACNA was founded, and our diocese then became part of that province. And so we've continued being who we are and being faithful to the faith once delivered to the saints, and we'll continue to do that, regardless of who we're associated with and where things go. I think really the ACNA for me is a bit of a miracle, and I think Archbishop Duncan used to use this illustration about building a plane in flight, and that's a lot of what we've had to do. And as a young province, it's pretty amazing how God has blessed us, and I think our faithfulness to a biblical and missionary and uniting province in terms of Anglican tradition.
One of the things that has changed since your diocese departed the Episcopal Church is you've had the freedom to move outside of some of the older structures. Like, for example, you've been able to take in congregations from outside of your former diocesan geographic boundaries. And in some cases, you've been able to plant churches in parts of Texas that were not previously in your geography. Tell us some more about that. And also, are there areas in which over the past 10, 11 years, you've seen God providentially at work in ways that you might not have anticipated or expected?
Well, I do think, church planting has probably been the area in which God has really blessed us the last 10 years. We've had some very successful church plants that are actually looking forward to planting their own churches as they continue to kind of replicate. It did free us really, of the old structures in one sense. I think one of the struggles the ACNA faces is, trying to regain kind of an understanding of geographical dioceses, but in this kind of missionary mode, as an early province, really just the opportunity to plant churches and to make disciples has been an amazing, really opportunity for all of us. And that's been the case here in the Diocese of Fort Worth. So we now stretch really from Midland, Texas to Monroe, Louisiana, from Wichita Falls down to College Station, and we even have a parish in Austin. All of that, I think, over time will probably work its way out into more of a geographical understanding of the diocese and the church. But the opportunity for us, to plant and to do evangelism and outreach in our communities, The one thing the lawsuit didn't do was excuse us from the obligation of being Great Commission Christians and ambassadors for Christ. And we've continued that. We've continued our partnerships around the world in places like Cambodia and northern Malawi, northern Mexico. And so, if anything, we've realized the church is a lot bigger than we thought. And I think the partnership with some of our overseas brothers and sisters has been a real blessing, and their prayers have been a real blessing as they've walked with us through the last 11 years of this horrible lawsuit.
Would it be accurate to say that Fort Worth has probably seen more visitors from other parts of the Anglican Communion in the last 10 years than it had previously in its history?
Well, yes, I think so. Prior to the departure from General Convention, we did host a number of primate type meetings, and but since then, the connection with kind of the Global South and the GAFCON provinces has been, I think very special. I've been able to attend all three GAFCON conferences in Nairobi and Jerusalem and back in Jerusalem, and it's amazing. I think we had a bit of a circle the wagons mentality before the lawsuit, and certainly we've had a little bit of that with the lawsuit in terms of not being sure what's going to happen. But I think over the last, really since the development of the ACNA, our partnership and our connection with other Orthodox Anglicans around the world has exponentially grown. And to be able to spend time in Singapore and Cambodia and Kenya and Uganda, and to realize we're really a huge family is amazing. And sadly, the Episcopal Church and the Church of Canada and the Church of England and Australia, I mean, they represent so little of the Anglican communion in terms of numbers and energy and gospel ministry. But it's still that kind of colonial structure that's trying to drive the ship. But the gospel faithfulness is obviously in the global South and the developing world. And to be connected with them, I think it really emboldens us and reminds us of the power of the Holy Spirit to push us forward in faithfulness and sharing the gospel and the good news of Jesus Christ.
In your own ministry context in Texas, there's been a continued significant influx of population. I've been surprised to hear from friends who have moved to Texas and say, wow, we're meeting a lot of people here who aren't from Texas. Who are you finding that are moving to your diocese? Who are the people that you're connecting with and your congregations connecting with? What's brought them to your part of the country?
Well, I mean, obviously the favorable economy and the job opportunities here and the education are pretty big in this part of the world. And we've seen a lot of African immigrants from various parts of the continent, a lot of Central America and Mexico immigrants. And we actually have 4 parishes that worship in Spanish, and we've got 2 African congregations. But any of our congregations, certainly in the Arlington area, for example, where a lot of Indian and African immigrants have come, if you walk into any of our parishes, you're going to see kind of a mixture of faces and cultures. And that's kind of exciting to me, to realize, that we can reach other groups of people other than people that look like me or like you. But I think God has brought people to our doorstep for that very reason, so that we can share the gospel with them, and they can reach others in their communities. So that is a challenge. You know, if you looked at the Diocese of Fort Worth in 1980 versus the Diocese of Fort Worth in 2020, it is a whole lot different nowadays. Um, and actually, you know, going back to think about some of the things that God has blessed us with, we spent so much time fighting that 15 or 20% that were loyal to the Episcopal Church agenda, you know, up through 2008. We had re-education teams come into the diocese from the Episcopal Church to try to show us the right way. We just had fight after fight with TEC loyalists in our own diocesan convention. Since 2008, I don't think we've had a single vote in convention where we had that wasn't unanimous in terms of dealing with canons or mission, you know. And so to not have to fight those battles daily is freed us up.
What are some things that you would just want people who are facing those sorts of situations to know based on your own experience?
Well, as I said at the beginning, you know, it's not really about property. I mean, it is about the truth of the gospel and standing up for that, regardless of what the consequences might be. We've been blessed in Texas with, you know, a court system that has looked at, you know, both the law and the way the church is structured, and ruled unanimously in our favor. And I think at least Methodists in Texas won't have to worry about whether they can keep their property as they continue to minister in their own neighborhoods. So that may be a positive thing for them. But in the end, you know, it really is about Jesus. It's not about winning or losing. It's not about property. As important as that is, those are all secondary things. I think that the thing that gives me a little, you know, a bit of an uplift is that, you know, while these properties are not the church, they are tools for us as the church. It is the people that are in them, that are worshiping in them, who in many cases, you know, built them and paid for them and continue to pay for them. It's not being, you know, pulled out from under them. And I think that's a blessing.
Thank you very much for that. I do appreciate your time today, and I wish you well in your diocese. Thanks as well for your words about your call to your diocese this Pentecost Sunday, and for self-examination and repentance and turning over to the Lord those things that need to be turned over to Him. I wish you well as you continue your ministry in Fort Worth, and I look forward to seeing more from you and your diocese and the Anglican Church in North America.
Thank you very much, Jeff. God bless you.